All right. Yeah, this is a PayPal request from Martin. I don't know how long we're going to get through because yeah, I'm knackered, but um, I've been looking forward to this. This is Tommy Mars on why Zappa was the greatest composer of the 20th century. Um, yeah, this should be good because I really enjoyed the drummers one. That was well good, and I recommend watching that if you haven't seen that. The drummers of Frank Zappa, but yeah, I just said the title Tommy Mars on why Zappa was the greatest composer. Let's go.
Tommy, who's the perhaps not the greatest composer, but who's the greater composer, Frank Zappa or Tommy Mars?
Oh, undoubtedly Frank Zappa.
Okay, we get a hierarchy here. That's a joke question, but
Yes.
this is the point: is that I think that Frank is the most incredible musician of at least the I don't know if you can say the whole 20th century, but he's a culmination of what was developed in the first half of the 20th century, and he's the greatest amazing composer of the second half of the 20th century over all forms of music. Now, would you go that far?
Well, I'd like to back up.
Okay,
Now, that question bugs me, your primary question,
right,
because I don't look at myself as a composer, but I do compose,
right.
and I compose spontaneously. That's my forte.
Which Frank does. Yeah.
Yes, and which we were all hired. Well, many of us were hired to do. But when it comes to the place in historical perspective, which we're talking
Yeah.
about, I completely agree with you about in not just American music, but music in general.
Mm.
Frank, to me, is like the quintessential, foremost um, perpetrator of the beyond.
Yes.
I mean, there was times, and this is what triggers me to talk about this, is
Mm.
that when you talk of composition, there are many times when certain musical institutions, devices, if you will, compositional, what's the word, like signature or um,
Genres? You don't mean genres?
a genre, if
Yeah.
you will. But Frank was very proud many times to say that he never went to school. You
Right.
know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was like a big thing to him. But he studied.
Yeah.
I mean, he studied. He just never formalized that like many people have done. And when certain guys were in the band, me for instance, uh, things of my training, my background, my personality, my signature, they rubbed off on him, and he was the type of guy that it was like a dichotomy because he was so controlling, and yet he wasn't a dummy. He,
Yeah.
he, he would extract this stuff very subtly, and he was the type of man to work with that he rarely complimented. And it wasn't like you were there to get accolades from him. It was just a thrill to be around that kind of a test tube, man. And when he could hear something that he never heard before, a perfect example is a device of the 14th century by a man named Landini. He had a certain type of cadence that all of the music of Mauschaut, Landini, many of the examples of that period used this particular cadence. And I'm very familiar with early music like that. And I would start throwing it in occasionally. And well, I'll never forget one time he asked me, what is that? And I said, it's a Landini cadence. And he started actually throwing it in. Um, I, I think it's in that one song, Frogs with Dirty Little Legs. I mean, he would bastardize it, though. That's the thing that always killed me. He would drill the point home until it never, every album, like either has an electronic device on it that's you can't
Is that
stand
the
it anymore.
mystery? It's a variation of the mystery word or mystery for the night. It's the mystery technology or the mystery riff. Is that the variation?
That's the variation, Bob. You hit it on the head.
Yeah.
And you could almost see that in every record. Um, Frank was the kind of guy, too, that would take it to the max. He not only was in your face, he cut off your face.
That's
You know what I
right.
mean? He just plowed through your
Yeah,
face with
yeah.
something. And I like that. You know what I mean? People today, I think, really need to get that point. You know, there's so much.
About Frank, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, in terms of the first question you were asking, his compositional prowess came many times from just keeping the radar up, man.
Yeah.
And
Knowing what to find.
exactly, knowing what to find,
Yeah.
right? That was in tune with him, that he
Yeah.
could really use. And a lot of people that are serious composers, as he was, are like chained to a particular tradition or a mindset. And the glory of Frank was that freedom. He's America to death. You know
That's
what I mean?
right.
It's just like every inch of him was an American. And
Which was the second half century is a mixed media world, you know?
so I wanted to qualify that about, being the best composer. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because he definitely took, synthesized, and excreted.
Right.
You know?
Now let me just supplement because I have all theory that I'm working out in my own writings and drama that stands on the shoulders of Frank. And I'm going to go to a quote in Ben's book in a minute, but the fact that my chart is the archetypes of American media in politics, and Frank did that. Now the incredible thing about Frank is that he wasn't a musician. He wasn't a category. He was a TV camera. Your idea of this rater, he was the central scrutinizer. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And he was imitating the, whatever you want to call the secret government or the big brother or the media monopoly of American culture. He was mirroring that back and eating anything that it could come along. So he was imitating the central scrutinizer, and it was a bizarre new phenomenon for the world to see. That's why the central scrutinizer is this weird automobile and UFO with the gypsy mutant vacuum cleaner, that apparatus. Now, I haven't developed it, but do you want to respond to that point? That he was more than a musician. That's why he's greater.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
That was only his forum. That was where he could, the fertile area that he could meld together. And I'd like to also expand upon what you're saying here by when you see that mirror. The key to Frank was laughter.
Yeah. Does humor belong in music? That's an archetypal question.
Yeah, but it's like a tongue-in-cheek.
But it's like.
But the point I'm trying to make is that if in fact we can laugh at ourselves, no matter what's going on, we're healthier species for it.
Right.
And that has always been, people.
But you know what we were? People were music. That was the dominant medium of the 50s, 60s, 70s.
That's
so
right.
You had a guy who had a supreme.
I think that's honestly why comedians at the moment, where censoring language is very important to people, that somehow thinking not saying words is some great achievement in the battle of freedom or whatever. But I think that's why comedians get the first attack, or someone like Frank Zappa, because if you have the ability to make someone laugh, not like these people that are coming and saying, "Man, you can't do this, can't do that." They're not funny. They don't know how to be funny, and by being able to make someone laugh, in order to make someone laugh, it's easier for you to get them on your side. So that's why humor, I think, is attacked in this society, because they know that, humor's very, very powerful in humans. They're right. And it's an endearing thing with Frank, especially for someone who's going to write such like bizarre structures and blah, 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 blah. Like the humor, kind of is like it is an endearing thing of his music, that on one hand is so insanely complex, and on the other hand it's absolutely just ridiculous. But yeah.
Understanding of generally all the variety of the encyclopedic view of music. You needed that kind of guy who could zap everybody who was brainwashed in a musical culture. So he had to go with the present medium, which was music, and be detached from it and nail everybody on it. You know what I mean?
Right. That's right.
That's what he was doing. That's what I mean. He's not a musician.
Not a musician, man.
He was using the present ground, like Finnegan's Wake is a book. He redid Finnegan's Wake, but Finnegan's Wake does not apply to after World War II. Because people started not to read, and you had a new environment that was the new sugar, that was the new candy, the food that was controlling him. And he was Uncle Meat, and he was doing recooking the food to create perception, to wake people wake up, figure it out.
Right.
It was so, and if you dug that, I'd like to have you give some. If you can give some personal way, he would hint. Like, he never said what I just said to you, or did he?
No.
Right.
That was a given in the equation.
But is that part of the test?
It's like I have a little story
Yeah.
about my audition with Frank. When I first saw on a sheet of paper that was published, the bottom of the page says Munchkin music.
Ooh. Yeah.
Now, I love.
Munchkins get me hot.
I have always loved The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
And it was sort of a terrible joke that Frank would just keep on at me. That I said, "Did you like The Wizard of Oz?" And Frank said,
He would do that. No, you
"No,
would.
check it out."
Yeah. You'd go that.
He caught me one time on an airplane, and I said, "You like The Wizard of Oz, huh?" And he said, "I think I saw it once." and I couldn't take that. I just couldn't stand it. That he would keep drilling me on that. You know what I mean? And
No, you asked him first.
I asked him first,
Then
but
he did it.
I didn't want to believe that he. And it was always I always wanted him to admit that he loved The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Why name your
whole music world.
publishing company massive, prodigious amounts of music under the word Munchkin music if you don't dig The Wizard of Oz? And he would never cop to it, and it was always frustrating. I'd always
You tried to catch him.
I tried to change the question.
Yeah, that's
to
kind
different
of,
things, allude
you
to
know what you were
different
doing?
things,
You
and
were-
he wouldn't. He always had his story straight.
Right,
And to this
yeah,
day, I don't know if
That's
it's true
right.
or not. He
'Cause
kept
you-
that mystery going.
You were
for me.
dealing with Rumpelstiltskin.
Hello.
And he wasn't going to fucking tell you his name. You know what I mean?
At least in that forum.
Yeah, in that whole his roots. Now, what's funny? He lists 184 sources on Freakout.
Mhm.
but that was the red herring. You know what
Red
I mean?
herring, baby. That's right.
Now he says with Zubin Mehta, 1970. He's UCLA when he conducted the beginning of 200 Motels and that music.
Mm.
He had somebody saying, it was in the Time magazine. I never heard it, but I saw the Time magazine coverage. He had someone yelling, "Munchkins get me hot," and he wanted that in there. Now, did he have Munchkin music before in '68, '69?
Oh
I
yeah.
assume.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So he's got Munchkins, and then why did he always start putting in mu mesons and physics terms and saying? He never said it, but Munchkins get my hot. And on Civilization Phase 3, he talks about mu mesons with halos. And you look at the booklet in Uncle Meat, he's got the young doll mu meson foot voluptuizer, some kind of thing.
Mhm.
Why did he ever talk to you about physics or these other non-musical technical points? That's what I'm more interested in, what you picked up on that.
Let's put it this way: the atmosphere of that was always present, and the specifics of that were rare, were very rare.
But when you say present, he never said mu mesons much, but you're saying there was something hinting at that. The
Mhm.
laboratory motif?
The laboratory
Yeah,
motif,
that's-
always there, and it's like sometimes, like for instance, politically, it was easy to talk to Frank. I remember when I Don't Want to Get Drafted started.
Yeah.
Anything. Frank had such knowledge, such scads of information up there on everything. He knew something
About
everything.
Because he scanned TV and everything all the time.
Scanned
Yeah.
everything. Man.
That's how
It was
much-
frightening. But the fact is, when you come down to literally his, in terms of physics, very little. I off the top of my head, I can't remember any specific thing, although it might come to me later.
Right. Now this might be interesting in terms of he's really getting the synclavier between 84 and 88, and you're
Mhm.
not working with him. So you got this Bob Stone guy, and these guys working with that thing. Now maybe did you drop in and visit him?
Well,
in that
yeah.
period?
As a matter of fact, I used the synclavier on Brown Moses. I did play the synclavier.
Oh no, yeah, I know, but that period we really got in, like civil
Yeah.
Light, starting in 85.
By that time, Frank had no need for a keyboard player. He was
Right.
typing it all
Right.
in, and he actually. Maybe this is a little bit where I can approach this from. That instrument for a particular period provided him with the robot he never had.
That's right.
And
Which
it
was all the metaphor.
it was to
you were
complete-
robots up to that point. Now
we were robots and puppets.
right. But see the improvisation that goes on in American culture, which he's celebrating, because they got to improvise bullshit news every day
Mhm.
in the TV studio, right?
Mhm.
Improvisation. It was a musical jazz environment people were living in.
Mm-hmm.
So he needed you guys to really mirror time. He had to have great musicians who could improvise and create, because that was every day was different.
Absolutely.
And so that's why you're not totally robots. You were a robot, but you were very creative, lively mirrors of the lively American culture of the last 30 years. You know what I mean? And he had that. So what you were going to, I just wanted, that's a thing, side thing. You were saying that
But
you were the robot.
But when the synclavier came in to the picture, it was just like I believe that he transcended something, and
I mean, when he got that,
when he realized what it could really do for him.
Yeah.
And take for instance, he used to call this concept of programming machine a Pinto. In which case,
a machine called Pinto, or
no,
the concept?
no, the concept. Let me quickly explain this, because it's something that we had talked about with the CS80. I had mentioned, you know, it would be so cool. I'm always looking for the humanness in a non-human environment.
Right.
That's why I loved in the early days synthesizing, because I looked for the unnatural or the little difference.
The imperfection theme you talk about with Yuha.
The imperfection, yes. Yeah. And I remember saying to Frank, you know what would be so cool is if, in fact, you had like 4 or 5 sounds and intersperse them throughout the keyboard to be able to have a choir of sounds, but you would have to write the music so that the key would be playing, if you wanted, say, a clarinet section versus a bassoon versus a cello. You would have to do it so that it would be homogeneous with it. In other words, the writing would be indicative of the particular keys that you would be playing. But up to that point, you could never do anything like that. You know what I mean?
Right. You said this in the early years.
Yeah, when Frank was doing all the work on the CS80 for me, you know, because that was the major cross between digital and analog.
Yeah.
That instrument, and did he spend a lot of money on that. And it came close, but when the synclavier happened, this is when he was able to do that. And by Pinto, I mean exactly that you have like maybe 4 or 5 different sounds, and they're broken down into certain notes on the keyboard, so that when you're playing chromatically up, you're not hearing the same sound on every single note. But the fact is that when you hear it together, it sounds so human and so right, because that's how it is when we hear things like that. So when he was able to do things like that, suddenly the human musician wasn't really as important, and that spurred him into unbelievable new realms, man.
And this quote will do that. Now, just before we go into it, think of the Reagan, the Teflon president. You know, supposedly in Lemuria, the king, he had no awareness of anybody outside of his own circle, the court, whatever the structure of Lemurian society was, which was similar in pre-Atlantis. When a bridge fell down, or he saw a building fall down or something, he'd say, okay, we need a new building. And after a while, it would be rebuilt. But he couldn't literally see who built it. So he thought he was manifesting it. Now, this is Reaganism. It's a Teflon. The White House had no access. This is xenocratic government, secret government that Frank talked about. Frank imitated that by saying, I'm going to run the whole world from the satellite position, and I'm the Grand Wazoo programming the whole planet from the synclavier, which is this metaphor.
I think he's way more politically... he wants Frank Zappa's music to have a more political thing. And it is a political thing, but I don't agree with... maybe you can say his music... Yeah, but not like... as if that's the defining thing about it. Because if that's true, why didn't Frank Zappa end his life being an activist and turning up at all rallies and things? Instead, he locked himself away in a studio with musicians. If he was it's the same with Bob Dylan. If Bob Dylan was actually more... Bob Dylan was a lyricist, and people tagged him onto things. But you hear Joan Baez say, but Bob Dylan never went to a rally in his life. He was not interested in that sort of thing. He just thought he wasn't, a political activist like that. He just wrote what he felt. And maybe I do agree with the Wizard of Oz thing. And knowing Frank Zappa like the Wizard of Oz actually really kind of clicked in my head that, he is like that. but he's like that. I do think as music. Now you can say he has got songs with political things and that, but there's no way to me, and from what I've seen of Zappa, that he didn't see himself as a musician or as a composer of music. Do you know what I mean? I think this guy is more politically, um like I could imagine you could. Well, he said you can talk to Zappa about anything. I imagine that's true, but I imagine that you would get yeah, a more enjoyable conversation with Zappa about music and different types of music than you would about politics. Because, like I say, if he that into politics, why did he create such insanely intricate music in the world of politics? Why wasn't he a politician? Do you know what I mean? I think he's more politically, um, driven than I think what Zappa was. And like I say, I'm not saying that Zappa wasn't at all. I think everybody of that time, I think everybody is in their own way. But yeah, I do think music was, what come first. Because like I say, why did he end his life locked in a studio making music if he was more political? It doesn't, yeah. But I suppose, well, actually, yeah, they are talking of him kind of post-mortemly. But yeah, hold on 2 seconds. All right, let's carry on. Let's go.
For the programming that the society was going through in the 80s.
That's a good metaphor, actually.
Yeah. So, I'm going to go to this, but what about the word climate? You know this thing of...
That's what I would say. What he's trying to say is a good metaphor for what Frank Zappa was. That what Frank Zappa was in music, you can, or yeah, metaphorically, what his music kind of. But that's not what I don't think in Zappa's head. Like, no one that makes music that intricate and that technical and, like they say, that like changing all the. Do you know what I mean? His mind's focused on music, like that's important to him. Yeah, but yeah, you could say that he's a great metaphor, like the Wizard of Oz is. I've got another great metaphor actually at the end for Zappa, but yeah, let's go.
notes and then creating something that sounds human. Does his use of the word harmonic climates, does that phrase apply to what you were talking about?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
maybe elaborate on how he talked about that.
Yeah, you know, his music is um, such a dense environment
Environments, that's the key thing.
of
Yeah.
of um, of humanness.
Yes.
I mean, not just of humanness, but of organic life.
But he understood that machines were human, that they were part of it. So he
Well,
put that
truly,
machine element in.
Frank had to be on the vanguard technologically. I mean, you talk to anybody for the past 30
That's
or
true.
40 years.
He was
they will
always ahead of
always mention Frank in the avant-garde
Yeah.
realm of always seeing ahead, grabbing that instrument and making it work, and then stamping a legitimate
Making it not
to this
work.
instrument, and then other people would start using it.
He was the human translator then of this supposedly new alien.
Well, not only translator, a seer.
a seer.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? He
Yeah.
and that to me was like the greatest freaking gift. I'll never forget one time when they were in New York. We were in New York, and I couldn't go to Manny's that day. I had an interview to do with somebody, and Frank comes to the gig. I think it was Stony Brook. And he says, "I got you the greatest toy that you'll ever want to have." And he bought the vocoder.
Right.
And I had to fucking play the vocoder that
That
night.
night.
I never even saw this instrument. He says, "You can do it." I said, "Frank, what are you talking about?" He says, "You've waited all your life for this." Because he said, "We'll use the the Eventide digital delay to let you harmonize with yourself." And we always thought we'd have like 2 or 3 of them. But this thing was like, it was already ready-made, baby.
Now
And I said, "I can't do it, Frank." He says, "Tommy."
Oh, you didn't do it?
No, he said, "Tommy."
Yeah.
Well, how long do we have between sound check and doors? All right. You know what I mean?
Well,
And we used it that.
Frank's a bit like a mob boss as well. Mm. Mm. I can't do that. I can't. Mm.
Right, man.
But the thing is, I heard you telling that story to U-Haul, and you told it a little more emotionally in the sense you have Frank, like the little kid, idiot Savant. Suddenly you're Zappa. You're the one who can do this stuff. These are You gotta do it. You know, he's like,
Yeah,
I want
yeah.
Daddy, you gotta give
Yeah,
me a
right.
fucking bicycle for Christmas. You know? It was that
Right, there's a
little
big thing that built up with that.
Yeah, the emotion
right.
was in your voice when you told me
Right.
how he responded.
But it was like that with all the instruments, man. When I joined the band, you know, like with his emu, he could only get a stupid pipe organ thing out of that, and it was wired the same way as my electrocomp. But
So
you know, in a lot
that's
of,
why I'm saying, are you the greater composer? You enhance the band's sound. You see, you know, other people actually
you know
just
what, you
get
know what,
very angry about it.
You know, I have to use the word synergy here because I truly believe in that. People meet people for a reason.
Yeah.
No matter how outside the meeting could be or from what
The
left
universe
field
works.
when
It is working.
It's supposed to hit when it's supposed to hit.
Yeah.
And then this symbiosis just occurs.
Yeah.
And
Symbiosis, right.
yeah, and like
Well, that's what
the
you
only,
were so perfect for him. He needed you in '77.
I needed him in '77.
Yeah, that's
you know,
right.
I couldn't keep a job playing in a hotel for more than 2 weeks. I couldn't put that mask on. I'd be like talking to you and telling you how fucked up you were. Where else do you get paid for doing that except Frank, man? And I was saying, why can't I like keep it freaking?
To be fair, that's another great like general thing. I think it's Genghis Khan, where Genghis Khan was one of the first kind of conquerors that worked out that the people that he, instead of just killing all the generals of the army, like if they have exceptional gifts in certain things, that you don't just you don't cut every general. You conquer an army and then you cut all the generals' heads off, and but some of them people might actually have knowledge that you don't. My dad used to say that when I started playing the guitar. He's like, when anyone says you're on a jam, like he's like, even if you think they're nowhere near as good as you, do it, because they just might know one thing that you don't, and then you go, yeah, and then you can take that and use it, but and it's true, like it is true.
Solo piano job anymore. I wanted to be myself.
Right.
You know?
And the thing about Frank, the grace that he had in his life is that someone would always show up, like Ian Underwood back at the Caravan
Yep.
Shop, that would do what his dreams were trying to do,
Mhm.
because he needed as much complexity. He's as wacko in rock, or in rock and roll, and the other specialized classical musicians, they're not going to relate to a guy in the 60s in rock, but he found somebody who could do it, which then
Sure. But you know, and it's the season of the Olympics now too.
Yeah.
That I want to just say this, that you know, Frank was like the ultimate gladiator coach. You'd show up with him with your tools, man, and your verve and your whatever you
Training.
whatever you had, man. You were the young lion going in, and that cat brought you from what you thought you were going to be to someone that you'd be afraid of because you were so high. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like sometimes when I would finish Herculean takes, and I would say, you know what? I know I can do this better, Frank. And he would look at me like, what are you talking about? And it wouldn't be like the money. It wouldn't be like going to overtime. He would just say, really? I said, yeah, when I played that last one, I just thought of something. He'd say, go ahead, work it out. Let's hear it.
And he let you do it.
And that's not, you know, like the way music is done.
Yeah.
You do it, bam. You do it, bam.
Yo
you do
cats,
it, bam.
the yo
Yeah.
cats.
And in essence, many of the records were like that. Like we would just go, and it's like, sometimes I didn't even feel like I was a human being anymore. I really felt like I was a machine operating for my coach. You know what I mean?
But you were
Just
into the beyond. It was a pleasurable experience.
That's
Right?
another
Absolutely,
great way
because
of putting
stretched
it.
my mind
That's
to be in
Them people in his band was
You know,
just his
Gurdjieff's
instruments.
philosophy was, we're all machines, and you've got to get rid of your anthropomorphic assumptions about yourself and
That's
get in
right.
touch with your machines.
That's right.
He always struck me as Gurdjieffian in that way.
Gurdjieffian. Well, I'm glad I did this interview if it was just for that.
Well,
Gurdjieffian.
You know,
Yeah.
you know
I've
Gurdjieff?
never heard of him before.
Oh, check out his books at the Phoenix or something. You'll just see his whole philosophy. He was in the 20s and 30s. He's
Mhm.
famous in the New Age as a Rasputin. He's much like Frank, a mysterious character who influenced people. I mean, he wasn't in the court like Rasputin, but he came out of Russia and he knew all the secret Sufi school stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I read him in the 60s, and one of my first thoughts was to talk to Frank about that, but it never happened when I talked to him in 1970. I can't remember, but I eventually decided he was. But you're confirming it because that's right. You know, Colin Wilson wrote The Outsider.
Yeah.
I just heard a lecture. He's Gurdjieffian, and he says we've got to deal with the robot in ourselves, and also this other spat. He had the robot was your instinctive autonomic self, and the other part was the thing that was trying to deal with it, and you had to get a separation and merging. But it included the idea of resist not evil, become the machine, become something, and then push yourself. That was the Gurdjieff, Colin Wilson. That's what I think you're saying. Is that Frank pushed you. You became something. You scared you. See, that's the point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That you never knew that you could have this much power.
You became evil.
And on the other hand,
demon.
you know, like just speaking of the humanists, I can tell you two tales of one time an arc light fell down on me in rehearsal.
First word in Finnegan's Wake, first page, arc light, very important. That was the beginning of Electric Theater 150 years ago. But
Yeah.
okay, go ahead.
And it's a hot beast, baby.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, I saw the CS80 melting part of it, and I brushed it off quickly. You know what I
Right.
mean? And like we were in the middle of a song, but he heard it explode and then it stopped, and I didn't realize that little piece of it had hit my head and my hair was burning.
Ooh.
And I didn't even care for my hands. I just didn't want that instrument. I just brushed it. You know, sometimes you just go through something and you don't
Right.
get touched by
Yeah.
it. But my head actually got burned, and it actually, I realized, it's holy fuck.
You went
And
to
I still have that scab back there. And you know, Frank said, like about 1 minute later, ready to play again? and I just couldn't believe how me personally, I remember one time I got beat up in Pau, France. And
on tour
by these paratroopers. Me and Peter Wolf went out one night, and I got beat. And I don't think I'll go there with Peter for a second. But anyway,
Yeah.
I get back to the hotel, and the roadies are like putting me out for bait so they can catch this bastard, this paratrooper. And Frank says, "What's going on here?" And I was limping because I had my ankle get crushed on a curve. The cat just stomped it, and there was like 8 of them. All they wanted was to kill. You know what I mean? Just put out a little steam. Anyways, Frank says, "What's with you?" And I says, "Well, I just got beat up, man." He says, "Well, what was it like?" And I told him, he said,
the anthropologist.
I wouldn't go there. But the thing what he said to me to kill me was, "Well, next time carry a knife." And I said, "Frank, if they saw the glint of steel, I wouldn't be here." And he just smiled, this weird look at me. You know?
He was working on you.
He was working on me, right?
Now here's the thing. Jerry brings up this quote that he's puzzled by, or
It will stop there. Yeah, they have said some very interesting things there. Him talking about becoming the machine. And that makes so much sense that his members of his band was his extensions of himself, really. And also the metaphor I thought of, which I think are not a lot of people, I don't know, maybe Zappa fans, but mixed martial arts and the UFC or MMA or anything like that you'll watch. You watch, basically that is any form of fighting you want to bring, you could bring with some rules, but in that setting, mixed martial artist is better. Whereas, like, take like a George St. Pierre, he's a mixed martial artist, but put him in a straight up judo fight, a straight up jiu-jitsu fight with a jiu-jitsu person, he'd get tapped straight away. But in MMA, that person will never do that to him, like, because there's other rules apply. It's more of a fight. You can't do things you can do, and like that's what I was thinking with Frank Zappa, that he's kind of a GSP. He's a mixed martial artist. Take like, I see Bob Dylan and Randy Newman are like that, but in terms of songwriting, writing the song. But literally, Randy Newman has songs that are of every genre. He has like no real genre, but he sounds like him. Same with Dylan. Well, I feel like Zappa is kind of the equivalent to that, to a Bob Dylan or a Randy Newman, but musically. Like he's where they focus on songwriting, he focus on the music, because I've seen Frank Zappa do every genre of music. And another thing I want to say about Frank, I think he's a little bit more of a fan of rock than he likes to admit. Because when he does decide to rock, it sounds. But then all of his genres do. When he did that reggae thing, that blew my mind because it was so authentic to reggae. Like, yeah, yeah. But that would be my metaphor for Frank. That it'd be like Randy Newman and Bob Dylan in terms of songwriting, where they just write. They'll take a genre, but it goes through the filter of them, so it comes out them, but in this new genre, like whether it's rock, country, whatever, blues. Um, yeah, and Zappa's that, but with the composing, with the music, like he's more into the music, and I do think that his music is a kind of um, yeah. I don't think the political thing, but I do think he's a social. What that person was saying as a political thing, I think he think like I would say more social. Like he's the antidote to the. Do you know what I mean? The kind of brainless, yeah, Ed Sheerans of the world. Do you know what I mean? These types of people where your Westlife, your X Factor winners, basically. Like yeah, that commercial thing. I do think he's an antidote to that, and in that sense, definite wake up. His music is a definite kind of wake up, and yeah, but yeah, I do think he was trying to put Frank in more of a political box. But then, like I say, I've only listened to certain things, and to be honest, I do focus on his music. His music is unreal. Like it's really, I mean, the singers is good and the melodies is good. You can't fault that. But like a lot of the times, the words is not like, yeah, they're like they said, they're more comical. They're just like almost like throwaway, but not because he does rhyme well and he puts words together well. Like it's just kind of that. I don't like. I personally, listening to Frank Zappa, don't think of a political message. A social one, yeah, but not so much political. And I do think he's a musician at heart. When he said that he's not just a musician, I think if you asked him in his head, he would call himself just a musician. Now, you say just, obviously not just a musician, because everybody's just a musician if they decide to call themselves one. But, like, do you know what I mean? I don't think he would have seen himself any more higher than an incredible, like, musical composer. Yeah, and a unique approach to that process. That's what I see, and like a kind of really like, I mean, Frank Zappa is kind of, he's not for the faint-hearted. Let's say that. Do you know what I mean? You can't just be a like you the average person when you say do you like music, what sort of music do you listen to? Oh, whatever's in the charts. That person is never ever ever going to understand Frank Zappa. But I also think that's kind of what he wanted. Like I don't think he was that interested in getting that them people and almost making fun of them people. Do you know what I mean? Them kind of dumb, docile vegetables that just, do you know what I mean? Will sit and watch whatever is on their telly. Yeah, he's a kind of antidote to that. But then let me know your thoughts. I mean, if you're, I'm not necessarily the most political person, so that's just not how I see the world anyway. So that's not how I see things. I mean, unless it's like, do you know what I mean, an overly political message. like an overly political point in a song. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, but yeah, let me know your thoughts. Do you think Zappa's crazy political? And do you know what I mean? Yeah, but yeah, that's part one anyway. Sweet.